Hi, everyone. I'm Dane Dormio. Thank you for joining. Thank you for tuning in, for joining the Tai Chi web show. I'm here with my good buddy, Andrew Brown. And we have the very special honor of being joined today by a colorful character. He's a Ivy League alum and ordained Taoist priest, among many other things, as well as an author and martial artist. So we're really glad to have you, Monk Yun Rou. Thanks for being here.
The honor is mine. Thanks for inviting me.
So there's, I know there's a lot of breadth to the work that you do, and you have a recent book that is, my impression is it's kind of about compassion and saving the world and that kind of thing. And you also have a broad background in martial arts and Taoist arts. So I'd like to, I'm curious to hear your origin story. How did you get started in all of this, and how does it all relate back to Tai Chi?
My home planet was invaded by lizard-like aliens. They were not compassionate. I was sent to Earth in a bubble. I arrived and my Earth parents rescued me, and they said, wow, you wear beads and you have no hair. You should be a Taoist monk.
Interesting. Never heard that story before.
So I grew up in New York City, and there are only two really interesting or relevant details about that time. One is that I had a very unusual and privileged childhood because my father was a very famous physician, and he took care of the people who in those days ran the world. So, kings and princes and captains of industry and Hollywood stars and all that. And so the reason why such a thing has any bearing on my later course is that I had an opportunity to see firsthand, on account of the sorts of people who paraded through our Manhattan apartment, whether a lot of the things that I was being told about the way the world works and about what we should and should not want from our lives was true. And I found out that it wasn't. And I concluded it wasn't because I saw these people who were supposed to have and represent everything that we all are supposed to want to have and be, whether that is accomplishment, fame, power, money, looks, influence, all that, celebrity. And instead, what I saw was, pretty much people who were like everybody else. And some of them were nice and happy. Some of them were assholes. Some of them threw their wives down the stairs and went to jail. Some of them evaded taxes and went to jail. Some of them were compassionate, beautiful artists and people. But in balance, I didn't see that the scales were tilted, particularly in their favor, at least not in the way that I was being told was true for the world and for society. So at some early stage, let's say around 12 years old or 13 years old, I began to doubt this narrative. And once I began doubting, it became a little bit of a habit. I'll get back to the other element of my childhood that bears on your question in a moment. But let's say that I doubted, other things that I was being told about religion, about society, about culture, about history, about biology, about many things. Because I figured that if I was being lied to or misled in one major area, then perhaps that was also true elsewhere. You can imagine what a joy I was to my parents. So the other thing that I wanted to share about those early days was that I think somehow there is such a thing as a seeking gene. I think that some of us are just born seekers. And I don't really know that I mean anything special or profound when I say seekers. I'm just trying to characterize a certain kind of personality in the same way that we could say we're born, and we're going to lose our hair, or we're born to be able to, jump and run well or something. But I mean, I think there's just some sort of questing, disquieted quality of mind that some people have. And they want to understand what is beneath the surface of the pond. And so, if there's anything unique or interesting at all about my origin story, and I'm not sure that there is, it's only that there was some intersection there between that genetics and that opportunity and environment. And the product was someone who just, kept on questing, because the questing urge was galvanized by experience.
I can totally relate to that, and I've come across similar ideas that the human species, the seekers among us, are kind of like the dandelion seeds that spread the species from across the planet. Originally, always wanting to see what's over the horizon, and whether it's physically or intellectually. There seems to be a stable proportion of the population that has that sort of, and I can certainly relate to that myself. So maybe there's a thing to that idea.
So maybe there is a distinction between wanderlust and the peripatetic impulse of youth and a desire to go deeper. And those two things might intersect in some people, but I'm not sure that they have to. I think that there are plenty of people who just like to wander around in the Taoist phrase of free and easy wandering. Some of them may do some not so free and easy wandering. But I'm not sure that necessarily, not to say that it cannot do, but I'm not sure that it necessarily goes together with, needing to understand things more deeply. I can tell you that, you referenced a couple of my books, and I've written 20 plus books. Honestly, I lost count now right at this moment. But the most recent one to be published came out very recently, and it's about turtles. And we could talk more about it if you wish, but the main thing I wanted to say about it was only that, I had this fascination with turtles that began when I was a little boy, and there was a particular moment when that fascination began, and it relates to the subject here at hand at this moment, because I remember thinking as I reached out of a canoe at 9 years old to try to grab a turtle. That turtle, every time it ducked under the water to evade me, was able to enter a world underneath to which I did not have access. And yet when it came up to the surface, it was able to look around and see me and the trees and the canoe and my, the sky and all the same things that I could see and presumably hear and smell and taste. But I was in some 8 or 9 year old fashion jealous of the fact that it could just, have an option that I didn't seem to have, to go under, to see what was really going on under there. And it was only much later in my life, after having spent 50 plus years in the company of turtles, that I recognized this subliminal connection and where it came from and why I like turtles. And somebody asked me recently on a podcast or something, well, that's also true of whales and dolphins and stuff. And my answer is, yeah, but I didn't happen to come across any whales or dolphins canoeing in a river in Connecticut when I was 9 years old. So, this is just just a coincidence.
Yeah, the experiences that influence your life, huh? Kind of interesting.
Exactly. If you would have told me that when I grabbed that little guy with a paddle, brought him into the canoe and took him home and kept him for a couple of weeks, that 50 odd years later, I'd be writing a book about the spirituality of the world seen through the eyes of turtles and all that. I would have doubted you, sir.
Healthy skepticism. Well, I have tons of questions regarding the Taoism stuff and the Tai Chi stuff. So if you're okay going into that, I'm really excited. So I've heard there's, so the Taoists were the scientists of their age. They were the modern philosophers of their time. And I mean, they had such a wealth of knowledge. Do you, what kind of different philosophy would you say that they had that the modern people are lacking? Like what elements of the Taoist philosophy really stand apart from what most people see the world as? Because you were saying you were searching for like a real understanding of the world, and like what did you find in Taoism that was like, this is why I'm going full bore, I love this, I'm going to study this for 30 years? Could you tell me that?
So there were several different questions there. Let me see if I can sew together an answer that licks the stamp on all of them just a little bit, enough to make it stick on the envelope. First, I want to say that I want to talk for a second about, it's actually been quite a bit more than 30 years now. I want to talk for a second about the function of the human brain.
Oh, okay.
So there is a function of the human brain which I believe is the root function, but it's not a function that most people talk about at all. When biologists particularly talk about the brain, they talk about providing the tools for us to navigate our environment so as to gain shelter and sustenance and reproduce and so on. And surely that's true. When other people talk about the brain, they talk about it in the context of human culture and society. They can talk about it sometimes in terms of what makes our species special. I don't know how special we are, but makes it unique. But there's something that isn't generally addressed, and that thing is this. The brain has as its job one, not to help you breathe, not to help you navigate or locomote, not to help you find a partner, not to help you find a house. Your brain, as its job one, has the job of a filter, because the environment that is actually so full of sensory information that we would be completely and totally bombarded into utter stupefaction by all the things that we can see at any moment, including things that are not consciously seen. All the things that we can hear, taste, smell, chemosense, and so on. Touch. The pressure of our clothes, for example. If there were no filter applied to this mad inrush, constant inrush of information, including the Higgs bosons, God particles passing through us on their way through the Earth and out the other side, in an instant or less, all the time, cosmic rays all the time, chemicals all the time, pheromones and on and on. This mad rush of input would render us absolutely non-functional. We wouldn't be able to take a single step. We wouldn't be able to form a question. We wouldn't be able to, anything, find our parts. So job one is to apply filters to the brain. And those filters are a combination of ones that are biologically instilled, before birth through our genetics. And there's variability there, which is why we have people who have special gifts in certain areas, and we have autistic people in that whole spectrum and so on. And then there are cultural and societal filters which are applied, and many of them are applied so subtly and pervasively, and in some cases intentionally and strategically, that we are not aware of them at all. Mm. But anyway, there are so many different filters that when we talk about the ancient Taoists versus modern people and what is compelling about this way of looking at the world, what has compelled me all these years, and what compels, hopefully the people who are listening to this and you too, it is that the filters that have been applied to us, the post-genetic filters, the filters of the digital world and age, the filters of our culture and society, have blocked from our view, from our sensation, many of the experiences, qualities, and lessons of nature. And that's not because there's something wrong with us, and nor, frankly, is it because there was something special about early Taoist masters, which is not true of us. This thing that I'm describing now is some kind of dance between the filters of the brain and the experience of being alive at a certain place in time. So I would like to give you an example. Early Taoists were Neolithic shamans. They didn't call themselves Taoists, And what was a shaman? A shaman was somebody who had an ability to see, like the turtle, different layers of reality. Some shamanistic traditions describe this experience as being like a big fat pencil which has thrust its way through 5 or 6 different frisbees, each one of them right through the middle. And each one of those frisbees represents a level of reality in our universe, in our multiverse. And so if Dane comes to me as the shaman, the medicine man in his village back several thousand years ago, and he says, in his thick New York Jewish accent, "Oi, I've got a pain." And I am not the gastroenterologist at the hospital in New York, but rather I am the shaman in Xinjiang province, and what is now Western China. And so I achieve some altered state. And I do this through some trance, some dance, some hallucinogen, some mushroom, some meditation. I have multiple options, but I achieve this state. And I go up the pencil to the next frisbee up, or maybe 2 frisbees up. And there I see, an Amur tiger, a Siberian tiger, a denizen of the land, chewing on Dane's abdomen. And, I look around and I see some chicken McNuggets, and I grab a bag and I go over to the tiger and I say, "Hey, listen, buddy, could I entice you not to chew on my friend there? How about you eat these instead?" And the tiger looks up at me and says, "But he's quite delicious, really." And I say, "Well, be that as it may, you're going to find that these chicken McNuggets are even more charming. And you'll really like them. They're full of fat and salt and stuff. And he's a skinny, wiry guy. You're going to like these. Try these." So, the tiger starts eating the chicken McNuggets and he leaves Dane alone. And then I come out of my trance and there's Dane lying on the floor of my igloo or my little hovel, and he's on his blanket. He looks up at me and he says, "Wow, shaman, medicine man, the pain is gone." So, what really happened there is a combination of the manipulation and understanding of vibration, perhaps with the use of native plants and the powers of suggestion and maybe a fourth thing, which would be mechanisms that we don't fully understand, or at least I don't fully understand. But in any case, the healing happened. So, they happened because that shaman had no internet, no Netflix, no Amazon Prime. He had no bookshelves to entertain him. He had no TV. He had no porno channels. He had no whatever else people spend all day doing, especially in the virus time. And all he had, the whole world that he had was this natural world around him. But if you could imagine that the 6 hours that, the average American spends on television or whatever it is, if you could imagine that all that time and attention, all that, did you see the show, or I got to watch this YouTube, or blah, blah, blah. You can imagine that all that energy and intelligence and insight was applied to watching the birch tree grow, to watching the way the river flowed, to watching the habits of the birds. You could imagine that one could develop a very profound understanding of the world. And could you say that it was a simpler world than the world we are engaging online? I'm not sure. I would say it was a less obvious world, but I'm not sure it was any simpler. But you understand that the filters that I've been talking about are different now. And so they were absent those filters. People could really pay attention to nature. So I'll give you one more example just to hammer home this idea before I try to explain what's relevant about it now. The great Taoist sage, the putative Taoist sage Lao Tzu, which just means the old boy or the old master, we don't know any more that he really lived than we know that Moses or Jesus or any of these historical figures really lived. And honestly, at the risk of offending any fundamentalist viewers, I'm not sure that the historicity of any of these people, including Lao Tzu, is so much the point. I think the lesson, and I think, for example, I believe that if there were an historical Jesus, he would be far more concerned, if he were to come to visit us today, that we were heeding his words and his teachings than killing each other over the details of his putative human life. Just a guess. But anyway, so let's imagine Lao Tzu for a minute as living in the time that he was supposed to live in at the time of the Western, of the Eastern Zhou dynasty. And let's say that he was the archivist and librarian to the king, as they say he may have been, which suggests that he was the curator of a collection of scrolls in many different languages and so on from different places. He was a very learned guy, must have had command of many languages, many scripts, many pictographic means of communication. I call them language. And one day the king comes to him, and this is an example that I've used recently in these chats, and I think it serves. The king comes to him and he says, one of my spies has told me that there's going to be an attack on our kingdom. And I don't have enough troops to completely defend the whole perimeter of our kingdom. I kind of need to know, where is this attack going to happen? If I get it wrong, we could all die and the kingdom could fall apart. If I get it right, we could save the day. Since you are the Taoist wizard and you know everything, could you please, and the fortune teller, could you please tell me, where should I put the troops? And, if he asked that question of one of the three of us, we'd soil ourselves. But when he asked it of Lao Tzu, will go off to his tree by the river and stand there in standing pole meditation for a little while. And as he's standing there thinking about the question, he says, sire, just give me a minute, I'll be right back. While he's thinking about it, he opens his eyes a little bit and he's watching the river flow in front of him. And one thing he notices, because he watches that river every single day, is that the clear white, the clear water that he's looking at and the white sand of the bottom is uncharacteristically flecked with little glittering bits of rock, which were not there yesterday. And he takes note of this because he knows that this rock is mica, and it comes from the high moraine way up in the mountains where the snow melts to form this river. But the problem is it's February. No snow should be melting and no mica should be present. But it is. So he goes back to the king and he says, "Sire, the attack is going to come from the north, from the high mountain pass." The king says, "Are you sure?" And Lao Tzu says, "I'm sure." He says, "How do you know?" He says, "Because the snows up there are melting when they should not be melting. And our enemies are going to take advantage of this fact to go through a mountain pass that should not be open to them and launch an attack, a surprise attack on us. So I want you to send the whole army up there, make an ambush, be very careful, prepare, boiling tar and pitch and arrows and flaming things and fighters and spears, and get ready because it's coming." So, the king does this, and sure enough, these invaders take advantage of this freak bit of weather that melted the snow and the clear mountain pass. They come through and they are destroyed by the ambush. And of course, this makes Lao Tzu even more famous and powerful, becomes the second most powerful man in the kingdom. But all he really did was stand there and pay attention to the river. So, there's two things available for all of us, right? If we go back to these filters, the two things are, what is the information available to us? How do we see, and what do we see? What do we sense? What filters can we remove willfully and with training and consideration, carefully, so that we don't go nuts? But what can we remove mindfully with practice, so that we can see and understand more? And then part B, what do we do with that information? And what we do with that information is a decision that is informed by our way of looking at the world, by our understanding of cycles and harmony and balance. And so I guess this is my very long-winded, I apologize, answer to your multi-pronged question. I hope it's satisfactory.
It's very interesting. No, I get the perspective there. We are inundated with information, and even the ancients were as well, but they had less distractions to take them away from this information coming at them all the time. So yeah, I can understand what you mean by that. And the thing that attracted me was they use nature and natural properties and principles to really help you understand almost anything that can be happening. That was one of my favorite things. It's just such a boiled down, like the 5 elements and then the 8 trigrams. And then after that, it comes the Yijing, and that's hard. That's confusing. But man, it's a really interesting philosophy, and I've really enjoyed my study so far. So thank you for paving a way and sharing your knowledge with us through all your books.
I really appreciate, in particular, that perspective on Lao Tzu, and his historicity or lack thereof, or being a non-issue, really from a certain perspective, and I'm curious about your relationship in particular with the daodejing, in its many versions, and what's your personal relationship with that and perspective on it?
I don't think I'm going to try something with the camera, but it's not going to work because I'm on a big screen, desktop computer. I believe to my right on those bookshelves. I honestly, it's been a little while since I made any kind of count, but I think there's something like 70 different translations. And what I find about them is that although we talk often about people using the I Ching as an interpretive tool, and we talk often about our relationship with throwing the arrow stalks or the coins or whatever to use the I Ching as a way of stimulating your own mind about a question or a problem or an opportunity or a challenge. I don't hear quite so much talk about that same approach to the daodejing. So scribes were very expensive back then, and there were only a very small number of people who could write or read. So the daodejing was tone poems, for a long, long time, for the great majority of its history. It wasn't written. And if it was written, I shouldn't say it wasn't written. What I mean to say is it wasn't read. It was written, but it wasn't read. It was communicated by song, by chanting. Obviously, we can't know, what its author or authors had in mind there in terms of the tones or the way it was meant to be performed or shared verbally, orally. I have some, and I don't know that there's really a lot of evidence for what I'm about to say. It's just like a little intuition that I have, but I'm characterizing it freely as just kind of a guess. But I just have a little nagging feeling about this, and I've had it for some time. I'm very interested in the interface between music, vibration, and quantum physics. And I'm very interested in the odd and difficult to understand and wrap your mind around quality of the fact that there really isn't anything solid to our world. And yet, none of the three of us would voluntarily stand in front of a semi on the freeway. But if we acknowledge that there isn't anything solid, then why not? And, the quantum answer for that is not entirely satisfactory, but the musical and vibratory model is a little bit helpful. And it suggests that, the vibration that is us would be subsumed by the stronger and discordant vibration of the truck. And then the vibration that is us would cease to be absorbed, subsumed. My guess, and again, I don't know that there is any evidence for this. I asked my friend Livia Cohn, who's a great and foremost scholar of these things, whether there was any evidence for this, and she said not really, but it could be true. It may be that there was something about the way these stanzas or chapters were sung or chanted or spoken that had some vibratory effect on the human body. And we won't know this. One of the reasons we won't know is that even if we came across some kind of account of such a thing, some kind of written contemporary account of it, we wouldn't really still understand it because we have no idea what people, until we have a time machine, we're not going to be able to know what it sounded like to people who were speaking that language of that time. And although it's fascinating commentary on, the resilience and robust nature of the pictographic language we call Chinese, that people in modern times can recognize those ancient pictographs and understand them. Scholars can read them, right? That is amazing, but it still doesn't reveal what things sound like. So anyway, I think that there is a value, absent the fact that, we don't know what it sounded like and cannot reproduce it. And my Mandarin is so execrable that I wouldn't even say that I have any. I'm not that smart. I work on it, but it's an uphill battle for me. But I think the reason for having so many translations is that by introducing a breadth of options as to how it might have struck the mind, the eye, and the ear, through all these translations, that is, all these interpretations from intelligent people who are approaching it from different personal and cultural backgrounds, as is the case with my little collection of them. I feel like I got a better chance of hitting the target if I use a shotgun than if I use a 22 target pistol and shoot a little tiny bullet at it. I'm more likely to get some piece of it right if I have a broad view of the text. And so that's how I engage it.
That's very good, very great. And I like what you mentioned about the poetry, how to recite it, how to sing the book. And yes, like you mentioned, that was how we passed down information for many, many thousands of years. That was the only way we could do it. So, well, we have these, we have this knowledge of the healing sounds. I'm not 100% sure how much you know about that, but if you hum these sounds, your body starts to harmonize with them, your organs harmonize with different sounds. And I know that I've heard about people that take tuning forks and can like ease your stomach pain by just putting a tuning fork that's at a right frequency. So I get what you're trying to say with frequency and the sound. And I'm an electrical engineer. I know what you mean with everything is energy, everything is waveform, everything is just that propagation. So yeah, I really like that explanation of the daodejing. Thank you.
You understand exactly what I meant by that. By the way, that the frequencies of things is also connected to something in the martial arts called the death touch or dimmak. But people completely misunderstand that art form. In fact, there have been books written built on it, what is, from my point of view, an entire house of cards about point striking these points in order to affect certain particular kinds of injury. In practical terms, there's two problems with it. Right? The first problem is that anybody who's ever been in a real fight knows that this is kind of poppycock. The idea that you're going to be able to pick and choose which little targets you want to, which acupuncture points you're going to hit when some guy is kicking and punching and grabbing you and wrestling you on the ground is so bloody far-fetched that I don't even want to engage its theoretical validity, because from a practical point of view, I just can't swallow it. However, if you are able to, in your own body, through your own agency, generate a certain frequency of vibration through a technique that you have perfected in your own practice, and you are able to apply that frequency to the body, not to any particular point, but to any part of your opponent's body. This is beyond my personal skill, by the way. I'm not able to do this, and I'm not sure that I know anybody that is, maybe. But if you were able to do that, and you trained this skill long and well enough so that you knew exactly what shaking vibratory technique you had to develop to touch somebody and affect their liver or their spleen or their heart or their lungs, their kidneys, I understand how, both in practice and in theory, that could work, because everything has a resonant frequency, just like the opera singer with her high C and the glass of the wine glass. So this makes perfect scientific sense, and it also makes practical sense. Although I acknowledge that the level of skill required is hard to imagine, but it's more imaginable to me than the other, wildly striking at points when somebody's trying to kill you.
Yeah. Yeah, MMA has proven a lot of these ancient ideas of fighting to be pretty much bunk. Just having someone come at you, rushing full strength, trying to kick and punch you, it's like, okay, I'm going to use the secret technique passed down through 15 generations that I inherited, no one else, and that's going to save me. And it's interesting to see these videos come out of these Tai Chi professionals and teachers that, well, I love Tai Chi and I love the practice of it, but these guys, they're not trained fighters. And so they get into the ring with these kung fu people or MMA people, and they just barrel through them. They're the truck, and that guy is just standing in the way. And what kind of a perspective do you have? You've been doing Tai Chi for so long. What kind of perspective do you have on the fighting, or like the not performance fighting, but hand-to-hand, safe play fighting that we like to do in the ring?
So let me frame this answer and the art in a way that I'm sure my teacher is whispering in my ear, sitting like a little homunculus on my shoulder now. You can't see him because he's the size of a toothpick, but he's in there. And he's going, don't say this, shut up, don't talk about this. And as always, when I don't listen to him, I regret it. So I'm going to keep these comments very general. And this is what I'm going to say. This art was a battlefield art. Mm-hmm. It was never intended to be either an art or to teach the kind of weapon that would be used for a gentleman out for an evening at the brothel, likely to be waylaid in the alley behind after. Right? Mm-hmm. There are arts aplenty for exactly that application.
Wing Chun.
Those arts would be, to Dane's eyes light up just at the mere mention of the brothel. But those arts would be a better fit for the kind of challenges that some of these MMA guys are doing. But Tai Chi was simply never this. That doesn't mean it wasn't any good. It just means you're talking apples and oranges. It was a battlefield art, and it was exclusively conducted with weapons of war in hand. Mm-hmm. The idea that we would do this, sort of healthful. Well, okay, so I'm getting ahead of myself. The purpose of Tai Chi from its inception, 400 years ago in Chen Village, or more than 400 years ago, was that conscriptors, agents of the emperor, would just suddenly come into town unannounced in their voyage through the countryside, and they would snag every man between the age of 15 and 50 and drag him off to fight for a cause he didn't care about, in the name of someone he had never met, and for reasons he did not understand, and against his will. And the primary work that anybody did in martial arts training in that circumstance and in that day was to simply use and to practice and develop skills that would allow you to come home to your family, mm-hmm. which such a tiny proportion of the people taken away in such a fashion ever did. So we're talking about very nuts and bolts survival thing. We're not talking about, wushu on YouTube. We're not talking about the octagon. We're talking about real life. Something happens, you're dragged away. And then typically these imperial conscriptors would have their own training agenda. So they would look at one of you guys and say, oh, I'm looking at the way you move and your body type. You're going to be good with a dao, with a curved sword, because you're a farmer and that thing is just like a machete. You, on the other hand, look a little bit more, have a little more finesse in your movement. I think you might be able to become competent with the long battle sword. And you big, strong guy over there who carries a few extra pounds, I'm going to put this, 75-pound halberd in your hand. I'm going to tell you, just swing this thing around, because whatever it hits dies. And you're big and strong, so you can do it. And some number of people would be given a spear and told, just use this to keep the guys away. And then, of course, what would happen on the battlefield? Utter and total chaos. because a battlefield like that is unimaginable to us. The running around, the screaming, the dying, the bleeding, the absolute every direction, and it's not like the movies, it was an absolute horror show. And your chances of coming back from it at all were tiny, and the coming back uninjured were even tinier. But some proportion of people came back and to their village, and then everybody celebrated their return. And they went, wow, I guess the things that we've been practicing here, what can you tell us to make it better? He says, well, this that we practice, that doesn't work. You got to do it this way instead. So, you have a founder, ninth generation or whatever he was, I can't remember now, founder like Chen Wang Ting, early 1600s, and he takes these martial arts of the day, which is to say the things that work, the things that people use and live. That's all. They're not beautiful, not animals. They're just the things that bring the guys home. And he makes an amalgam between that one leg of the tripod, Taoist training that he has received from a Taoist sage, a putative Taoist sage through his wife's family. And then the third one, which is Chinese medicine, or we call it TCM, but there's no such thing back then. Just the medicine of the day. Why the medicine of the day? A, because if you understand how something works, you understand how to break it. And B, you have to be able to put things back together if you break them, because that's the world, right? That you live in. So, those three, that tripod. Now, let's just skip through the fact that, at some point, practicing with a 9 or 11-foot pole, which was, or with the guandao, with a halberd, was very important, but there weren't enough horses. So, you did all the movements standing in horse stance, pretending you were on a horse. And there was a little bit of fudging to try to make some of those practice work, because you had 50 guys trying to practice that out of 30 horses, right? And then after a little while, people began to notice that, the guys who practiced this stuff, not only did they come back from the battlefield, but, when they're 50 years old or 60 years old, they just look a lot better than the other guys who died at 48. Not just because they're alive, but because they can still move properly and stuff. And, so there are some other benefits to this. So we're just going to have everybody in the village practice it together because, it's good for you. And then at some point they thought, well, let's capitalize on this. There's not a war right now. How can we make some money from these skills? How can we sell ourselves as bodyguards? We can, protect caravans of rich people and their goods and so on. But if we take a fast forward to the modern day, the battlefield now, and the reason why Tai Chi is of interest beyond the historical recreation of battlefield skills for lunatics like me that go in the park for 3 hours and play with a spear. But, for most people who are not crazy, the appeal is that the battlefield of the day is the speed and greed world with its stressors and its poisoned food and its disconnection from nature and its unnatural biorhythm and its light at night and emissions into the eyes and the things that stimulate so you can't get REM sleep, and on and on and on, the litany of woes that describe modern digital life. And we say, look, is there anything in that survival art that help people live in that battlefield that could help us now in modern day live in this battlefield? And the answer, it turns out, is yes. And that's why it's interesting for most people.
So I want to make sure that at some point people have a chance to learn how they can learn more about you, your teachings, your books, that sort of thing. What's a good way for people to connect with you or dip into your body of work?
So I'll give you that information, but before I do, I just want to say that there are many good exponents of these ideas out there, and I'm I have no lock on that. And the important thing is not so much to find me, but to find your own way into these practices. A teacher you like, local classes that are practical once the current epidemic has passed, or online classes to which you can connect, and to find a teacher who is not, the fantasy teacher on the wushu movie, but rather somebody that you like and respect, and not that you want to be them, but that you want whatever equanimity or skill or insight you think they have, so that you can apply it in your own circumstance. So I just want to make clear that, I'm less interested in self-promotion than I am with the promotion of, the umbrella of Taoism and Taoist arts, because it's such a wonderful thing and there's so many good people doing it. And that's the important stuff. So my website is actually the easiest thing, I think, for people is, rather than spelling it all out, is to just use Play Tai Chi. So if you go to www.playtaichi.com, that will take you to my monk site. I've owned that URL for a long time, and it's an easy one to remember in this kind of circumstance. My name is spelled Y-U-N, new word R-O-U. It's pronounced Yun Rou, like row the boat. My books are on Amazon. The most recent one, which I hope everybody will check out because I think it's a nice blend of bitter medicine and strawberry milkshake. Sometimes, I wrote one book which was just bitter medicine, and a lot of people didn't like me very much after they read that. So this one is the same bitter medicine, but it's in the strawberry milkshake that I hope you'll find so delicious that you don't know you're taking anything bitter going down. Anyway, that book is called Turtle Planet. And of course, it's not really so much about turtles, although there's some stuff about turtles in it. But I have martial arts novels and various other things, and I have a bunch of new ones coming out in the next year. So I also have a newsletter, which is the way that I keep in touch with most people. And there's a subscribe button. It's free on my website. Just hit that button and you'll get a Zoom invitation there's also a Zoom invitation to classes, and you hit the subscribe button and you get the newsletter once or twice a month.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're definitely in the same boat as far as promoting these practices, promoting that more people have a personal daily mind-body energetic hygiene practice of some kind, and with the teacher that you connect and relate with, and it's that's the most important thing, is that you don't have to be a weirdo who shaves his head and lives in a monastery in order to in order to get the benefits of these practices, because they're available for everyone, and it's and I'm glad that we're on the same team, and I want to thank you personally also for the work that you do and the quality of your writing. That was how I first encountered you, and I really appreciate the quality of that, and also the quality of the wisdom that you've shared with us this evening. So thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much for your kind words. I will tell you that most Taoist monks and priests have a top knot. I only shave my head because I can't grow one. And also that I think that there's a very important thing, that one last thing that we did not discuss, which I think we should leave people with, is that in the same way that Tai Chi grew up in a village and a community where people could exchange techniques and ideas, and in the same way that we had, our so-called World Tai Chi Day Summit, in an attempt to bring people from around the world together, I think that the community aspect of these arts is perhaps unsung and more important than we give it credit for, for being. I don't know that, if I didn't have people who were interested in sharing these things with me, then, I would probably be quite a recluse. And, I would just be meditating for hours every day, or, forgive the expression, but, playing with my pole out there in the park, or my sword. And, that no doubt would be less helpful to planet Earth and certainly less enjoyable. So I thank you guys for doing what you do, for having me on, for being part of this community, and for emphasizing the community dimension and its importance.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah, so I feel like the best way to end is to say to be continued, because there's so many topics opened and potentially explorable. So looking forward to continuing the conversation, and I think we'll leave it at that for now.
That will be a happy day. Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here. Bye, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.